Hello, everyone. This is Gene Geog History, and in my last few videos, I discussed my CRI genetics results, with the first video being my recent ancestry, the second video being my ancient ancestry, and then I went back to do GEDmatch when it came to my results and used a lot of calculators to kind of break down what it would look like if I used the Afrocentric calculator and if I used the admixture calculator, which showed the admixture that you get from being a New World Black person. And now I'm going to reveal my ancestry results. So, before I get into my ancestry results, I want to discuss a bit about my background. I am ethnically Jamaican on both sides of my family for several generations. I've already done the genealogy elements of it. I've been building my family tree for almost 4 years at this point, and based on the family stories and what I found data wise, I'm Jamaican, though I don't live in Jamaica, so I'm a Jamaican diasporic. So, with that in mind, I am going to show you my ancestry results. Though I did it late 2021, early 2022, so I'm going to show my original results before breaking down the updates. As you can see from the bottom right, I screenshotted this at August 21st, 2022, though I've had it done a while beforehand. So this is one of the original results of my AncestryDNA results. So we have 48% Nigeria, which wasn't the most helpful because I'm pretty sure when Africans were taken from Nigeria to the New World, it wasn't called Nigeria at the time. But it's just a general area, and it didn't really delve into the tribes in Nigeria, which would be more accurate since the tribes have lasted longer than the country in itself. But Nigeria was one of the hot spots when it came to the transatlantic slave trade, so it makes sense that essentially half of my DNA would come from Nigeria. Benin and Togo is literally right next to Nigeria. I'm pretty sure there's some with some of the tribes that were on both countries. Though obviously it wasn't called Benin and Togo yet. That would have been 19%, so adding those two, that would have been 67% of my DNA. Ivory Coast and Ghana, literally right beside Benin and Togo. That would have added an additional 14%. So I'm literally doing the math as I'm recording this. So I think it was at 48 plus 19, which would have been 67 plus 14. Literally, these three regions are 81% of my ancestry and admixture based on this result. So those three regions that you see at the left side of Africa. And then obviously once you add Mali, which is the top purple corner, that's 5%. Adding that literally is cost. Adding that means that those four regions is 86% of my admixture. Where obviously the only other African region is Cameroon, Congo, and the Western Bantu people. And this is Central Africa, so it's not the same region geographically as Western Africa. Some of the Europeans landed in Central Africa instead of West Africa, and then they brought them over. Though I do know that a lot more Central Africans were brought over to South America compared to North America and the Caribbean. So, anyways, once you add up all five of my categories, this test has me at 92% Sub Saharan African, which makes sense. And to me, it shows that I have less admixture than the average Jamaican, which I believe is around 75 to 80% Sub-Saharan African, and I have 92%. Just based off my family history and what I've been told, I do believe one branch of my family, so one of my grandparents, they come from a long line of Maroons, so they were essentially people who were brought from Africa to Jamaica in this case. They broke away from slavery and then they created their own communities and they just stayed intermixing with one another. So because they didn't really have that admixture compared to a lot of the others, Jamaicans, and they continue marrying within one another throughout generations. The next highest is essentially South Asia, which you see from here, and it's essentially India, really. So the 4% is from southern India. So that's essentially like the Tamil area, very southern India. Sri Lanka, though it didn't mention Sri Lanka either, but it's in that grouping since I'm assuming it's that Tamil ethnic group. And those were the people who has high ancient South or ancestral South Indian ancestry. So that's the non-Caucasoid element in South Asians. So the fact that they were brought over to the Caribbean is interesting. And then adding the 2%, it says Bengali, which is very interesting. And from what I've researched, it might not actually be Bengali. It might be a northern Indian, but they couldn't pick up, or they didn't have the reference point for that, so they assumed it to be Bengali. I have to do more research on that. But adding those two, it means that I am 6% South Asian. And a part of me was and wasn't shocked. There were some family stories about us being Indian, but honestly, I didn't know if they meant indigenous, like Amerindian, that type, or literally India from India. But it makes sense because there is some Indian influences on some of the food, mainly roti, and there is an Indo-Caribbean population, so that definitely added up. And based on what I've been told by one branch of my family, we come from an area that isn't too far from where a lot of the Indo-Jamaicans and the Douglas migrated from. So that's not surprising. And then I only have 2% European, which was definitely a shocker. On average, a Jamaican person is going to have an Afro-Jamaican person or Black Jamaican person is going to have European admixture, obviously due to the transatlantic slave trade, and them being the main reason why Black people were over in the Caribbean in the first place. So with that in mind, I was expecting to have more European, like at least 10, 15, maybe 20% at the most, but 2%, honestly, I did kind of feel good about that, where maybe it meant that my ancestors, they didn't have much European admixture via grape, so I did feel good about that, though that might not necessarily be the case. It might have just been due to me not inheriting much of that European, and or my parents not inheriting much of it, and then my grandparents, so on and so forth. And the 2% I have here is Ireland, which I found to be interesting. And initially, I just thought, okay, the Irish people were some of the Anglo conquistadors. But from the little I've researched, there were some Irish indentured servants, so that might not have been the case. And I know for the Indian admixture, they came through, or that came through indentured servitude. So that's my old ancestry results from 2021. I think it was early 2022 where I got it. Now I'm going to show my recent Ancestry.ca results that was updated in 2024, and there's a lot more information compared to what is shown here. So, with my new results, there are definitely a decent amount of changes, though I believe the number based on the continental admixture is relatively the same. So, for the Nigeria, I mentioned that on my older results, it had me at 48%, but here it has me at 30%, so it went down by 18%. And something tells me that the reason why they did this is because they split up Yoruba land from Nigeria, where obviously Yoruba or the Yoruba people is a very popular group in Nigeria, but they split it into Yoruba land, so it's seen as a different area compared to Nigeria. So it definitely went down by a lot, and I am going to get into the ethnic groups later, but this is just a general description of my overall admixture. So it went 30%. So it went to 30% from 48%, My Benin and Togo actually went up, where on my older results it was 19%, where on this result it went up 8%, where it's now at 27%. And I'm assuming some of the Nigeria in my older results went into the Benin and Togo, which would explain the decreasing Nigerian from old to new to the increasing Benin and Togo from the old to new. So I guess whatever ethnic group that is more populous in both, in my results they found it in Benin and Togo. So I'm assuming that's why there's a shift there. My Ivory Coast and Ghana had a bit of a difference where on my older results it was at 14% and on my newer results it's at 10%. Something tells me that some of that might have went into the Yoruba land, which I'm going to get into now. Yoruba land was a new category that they added in between my old results and my new results where it wasn't a thing before. And Yoruba land, I'm assuming this is an area that was in southern or especially in southwestern Nigeria and in other countries where they decided to give it its own group because they are genetically different from what they claim to be Nigeria. And I'm definitely interested in looking that up to see the main differences between them. And then, of course, we had Central West Africa, where what's interesting about this is that I believe they split what was Cameroon, Congo, and the Western Bantus peoples on my old results into two different results. I believe they split that order category in Central West Africa and the Western Bantu people. So they're two completely different categories now. Where on my Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantus people results, it had me at 6% in my order results, but with it being split in two, the Central West Africa is 7%, so it's higher than my results in the older category, and obviously Central West Africa makes sense just based on the slave trade, and if you know your geography, you knew that they took slave Africans mainly from West and Central Africa, and Central West Africa is literally kind of just the combination of both of them, since it's in the Atlantic. So my Mali didn't really change much. It was 5% on my older results, and it's 6% on this result. Really not much difference there. And I'm just going to continue with my African results. So there is the Western Bantu people, which I believe is what they split up. Actually, yeah, this is why they split up Cameroon and Congo and the Western Bantu peoples in my older results. On my newer results, this is at 3%. So if we compare, or if you add the 3% of the Western Bantus people and add it to the 7% Central West Africa, that's 10%. So the 10% of both of those categories went up 4% from what was 6% on my old results where those two categories were grouped together. And then the 2% is Cameroon, which I'm assuming is also considered that it might be considered the Cameroon. Yeah, it literally is Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu people. So, from that Cameroon, Congo, and Western Bantu people on my old results, it was split into three parts, not two. It was split into Central West Africa, Western Bantu people, and Cameroon. So, adding the results of those three results, it's 12%. So, it went from 6% on my old results, and it doubled to 12% on my newer results. So, I found that to be very interesting. So adding all of the categories that are in Africa together, I'm still at 92% Sub-Saharan African. So that didn't change from my older to my newer results. When it comes to my South Asian ancestry, I did notice, okay, so they changed it from Southern India, that was the category on my older results, where they specifically focus on the Deccan and the Gulf of Mannar. That's the title of it. And it still covers the same area of South India and Sri Lanka. So it's the same area, they just changed the name. On my old results, this is at 4%, but on my new results, it's 5%. So it's really not much of a difference, like at all. And then the other South Asian category that I have is Bengal, where it was 2% on my older results, and it's 1% here. So this might be noise since it's only 1%, but those two categories essentially remain consistent from my old results to the new results, and it's still at 6%. We're adding those two categories on the older results, it added to 6%, and on here, it's still 6%. The only difference is that they took 1% of my Bengal and added it to the South Indian, but it's the same result. So looking at my European admixture, it's still at 2%, but they split up the categories. And what's interesting here is that on my old results, it had me at 2% Ireland specifically. But if you look at my new results, Ireland is nowhere near on the list. It has me at 1% England and Northwestern Europe. Obviously, it makes sense because Jamaica is an Anglo country, meaning it was colonized by England. The main language is English, so yeah, that makes sense. But the 1% that isn't that is from Wales. And this I definitely need to do more research on regarding Wales' presence in Jamaica. This could just be a misread, where as you see, Wales is the closest to Ireland outside of the British, sorry, within the British countries, or the countries of the United Kingdom, Wales is the closest to Ireland, so maybe it's just a misread, or maybe there's some inter-travel there, but yeah. So Ireland's not on the list, and it is Wales and England. So I found that to be pretty interesting, but that adds to 2%. Here are my newer results, but they're just split into different categories, and I had 2% of Ireland on my old results. So essentially, the overall big numbers didn't change on my ancestry results, where it is 92% Sub-Saharan African on both, 6% South Asian on both, and 2% English and Irish, or English and or Irish. So the overall big numbers didn't change with the same big categories, though the smaller categories are definitely different, and there's a lot to distinguish there. So, with this most recent update on AncestryDNA, they decided to add ethnic groups, which is something that 23andMe is very good at, which Ancestry wasn't until recently. So this update was something that I found very interesting. I'm not going to get too deep in depth into the ethnic groups yet because I'm going to do my own research, and I'll probably post videos on those specific groups where I'm learning this as I'm recording it. But just an interesting tidbit here. With Nigeria, it has me at 30%, but it says your ancestral region estimate is 30%, but it can range from 26% to 37%, so that it's kind of like a median there. So it has me at 4 ethnic groups that I'm tied to in Nigeria. So the first one is Isan, where that's one of the more familiar ones to me. The second one is Ibibio. Excuse my French if I'm mispronouncing these words, which I'm sure I am. The third one is Idoma, and the fourth one is Igbo, where that one's not surprising at all. That's one of the main ethnic groups of Nigeria, and with a lot of the slave trade, a lot of Igbo people were brought over to the West. So I'm not surprised with that result at all. So I'm definitely looking forward to these, or to doing more research on these 4 ethnic groups. And what's also interesting about it is that it also shows which parents gave you what when it comes to the ethnic group or the nationality or the area. So it has me at 30%. There I am. Parent 1, I inherited 12% of Nigeria from parent 1, and the other 18% I inherited from parent 2. And it still has my journey as being in Jamaica, and looking at some of these communities, it's accurate when it comes to my genealogy and from my family told me. So it shows me that a lot of Nigerians and people from the Isan, Ibibo, Igbo, and Idoma tribes migrated or were taken to Jamaica. So next is Benin and Togo, which has me at 27%, but my ancestor region estimate is that, but it can range from 19% to 33%. And the ethnic groups that I am enlisted in when it comes to Benin and Togo is the Aja group, the Iwi or Ui group, the Fan group, and the Jen group. So these are four that I'm definitely going to have to research for sure. I also found it interesting that on both my Ancestry DNA and my CRI ancestry, the Isan tribe was listed on both, so that's clearly accurate. And from what it says here, I got 10% of that 27 from parent 1, and the other 17% I got from parent 2. With people with these journeys often sharing the region, so pretty much Jamaicans have Benin and Togo ancestry, and it linked me to other Jamaicans by us having a similar admixture. So there's that. So I wanted to get into this new category called Yoruba Land, where my range is from 0 to 7%. So the description here is our Yoruba Land region is centered around Benin and southwestern Nigeria. So I guess that's the difference between this compared to Nigeria and Benin and Togo. It's essentially eastern Benin and southwestern Nigeria. Okay, so that with that, I get it. And actually, no, let's read a bit more of the description just so we can have a stronger descriptor. Tropical and coastal, the area has provided abundant fish and fruits to its inhabitants for centuries. When many fell victim to the transatlantic slave trade, okay, so they brought that point up, they brought their agricultural skills and elements of their spiritual practices, which became known as voodoo and santeria, to the Americans. Ooh, and that's actually very interesting, and I like that connection. And you definitely do see that in a lot of the Caribbean. Anyways, it's common nowadays for people to speak a European language, i.e., English, French, or a related Creole, alongside local languages. Hospitality and respect for elders are key aspects of social interactions, and the region's rich oral tradition means that storytelling is an art enjoyed by all ages. So the ethnic groups of Yorubaland is Jen, which I believe also appeared on my Benin and Togo ethnic group, so there's a consistency there. Idasha. I know I probably skewed up that saying. And obviously, the Yoruba ethnic group would be in Yorubaland. Just makes sense. And I knew the Yoruba group were in southern Nigeria, anyways. But it has it as Iran Yoruba. So I find that to be interesting. Maybe that's a sub bracket of the Yoruba. So just from scrolling down and looking at it, I got 5 of my 7% of Yorubaland from parent 1, and the other 2 I got from parent 2. So we move on to Central West Africa, where my range is from 2 to 11%. And there's only one ethnic group that pops up here, and that is the Iran Yoruba, which was on Yorubaland. And just from looking at where this is, it definitely makes sense. It seems like it's on the southern and the western parts of Nigeria and a few of those other countries. So yeah, this kind of just adds up really. Also, I inherited 0% of this from parent 1 and all 7% of this from parent 2. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Mali group, and my range is from 3 to 9%. So it had my median at 6%. So there are a few ethnic groups here. So Fula is obviously associated with the Fulani group. I know that this group is in the northern part of West Africa, and they're seen as a bit more admixed than the other tribes in West Africa due to their proximity to the Saharan Desert and Northern Africa. So the Fula tribe is one of the tribes that show up here. The Mendi tribe is a tribe that showed up on my Ancestry CRI result, but it had it listed there as Sierra Leone, so I'm assuming the Mende tribe is primarily in Sierra Leone, and I got Sierra Leone in a few of my other illustrative DNA older ancestry tests, so there's that connection. And then the other two are the Bambara tribe, which I don't know much about. I'm looking forward to researching that, and the Dogon tribe. So there's that connection too. And when it comes to what parent passed what down to me, I inherited 2% of the Mali ancestry from parent 1, and the other 4 I inherited from parent 2. So, Cameroon is the final category where I have specific ethnic groups in when it comes to my DNA results and the groups. Despite me only having 2%, though it can range from 0 to 5%. And the ethnic groups of Cameroon that I have here is the Babangi ethnic group, then the Bafao Balong group, the Bafut group, and the Bakusi group. I know absolutely nothing about any of these groups, but I'm definitely very interested into doing more research on them in the future. And the final category that I'm going to get into with this video is the DNA origins journey, where it pretty much describes where your recent ancestry came from within the last several generations. So if you have a mixed ethnic background or a mixed race background, a bunch of other countries will show up. And these recent countries tend to not have the longest history. That's why on a DNA test, it won't show Jamaica or Jamaican because it's still a recent country historically. And they realize that there's admixture in the New World. So they always kind of put that in the DNA origins. I know on 23andMe, it's like akin to the communities there. So, like I mentioned, and as you can see here, I only have Jamaica as my DNA origin journey because my 2 parents, my 4 grandparents, my 8 great grandparents, so on and so forth, are Jamaican and from Jamaica, so it makes sense. So it says, Jamaica, you and other people with this journey are linked through shared ancestors. You probably have family who lived in this area for years, and maybe some of your relatives still do. And yes, specific places where you're connected to is Western St. Catherine Parish, where I know that's accurate based on my maternal ancestry. Eastern Cornwall to West Surrey, this is a larger area, but that makes sense based off of where my maternal family's from. And then northwestern Cornwall, and this is definitely accurate as to where my father's ancestry is from. So pretty much based on the average admixture of a Jamaican and the location of where a lot of your ancestors are from or where they are linked to or what they reference, it'll pick up that you have recent ancestry from Jamaica. I'm not going to go down the ancestral journeys because I'm not posting my family members because they wouldn't support being posted online in this manner. So pretty much ancestral journeys show where your ancestors lived in the past 50 to 300 years, and I know for a fact, just based on talking to my living and my recently deceased family members and doing genealogy over the last 3 to 4 years through my maternal and paternal family, that my family has been in Jamaica for at least 300 years. And the journeys are identified by looking at groups of Ancestry DNA members who have a significant number of matches in common. So pretty much, if you and a bunch of other people have a bulk of matches in common, you clearly have a familial link that is linked to a specific area. And in my case, that is Jamaica. And they discovered how they're connected by comparing family trees, looking at trends in the birth dates, birth locations, and surnames of their ancestors. So that's an interesting element as well. So, literally, as I was making this video, they decided to change something as they added another category. And as you see on the bottom left, they added the South Asians in Jamaica ancestry journey. Obviously, with the ancestry journeys, it focuses more on your recent ancestry from 50 years ago to about like 300 years ago. So through the last 3 to 4 years I've been doing this, it only showed Jamaica, and I just talked about that a few seconds ago when it comes to this video. But literally within like the last few weeks, they must have just added South Asians in Jamaica. I did find it interesting that they didn't add Europeans in Jamaica since I also have 2% of that, but that to me just shows that my European ancestry is very ancient, where my South Asian ancestry is very recent, which definitely makes sense from discussions with my family members. And obviously, the community shows your recent ancestry and everything else when it comes to your ancestry results. So this shows like the African, the European, and those specific areas are ancient results. I ended up clicking the link of South Asians in Jamaica to read what they have in it when it comes to the descriptions. And I'm not going to read the base of the descriptions, but from what I scrolled, it seems like the timeline goes from 1850 to roughly around 1975, where just from briefly reading here, it mentions that Britain then took control of the government of Jamaica, and then they sought out workers from India to partake in indentured servitude. So that started from the mid 19th century. And then in the second area, it states around 1875 to 1900 that Indian workers finally stopped arriving during this time, but India's in Jamaica contributed to a distinct Caribbean island culture. And then it definitely mentions something about their religious scriptures and stuff like that. So they had to go with oral storytelling traditions. And a lot of them did remain Hindu or Muslim, though some did convert to Christianity. Then it moves on to the early 20th century, where, from what I can briefly mention, like I mentioned earlier, it says that workers from India had largely stopped arriving. The Indians that did remain on the island started a period of mosque and temple building, so they were kind of integrated into Jamaica, but they also wanted their own enclaves and communities, so they brought more of their religious elements into the agriculture, so I definitely think that makes sense. Then it moves on from 1925 to 1950, and from what I see here, it states that they ended up importing some of their movies from India and Pakistan so they can have some of their culture and media from their older countries in their Jamaican home. They built tapia houses, which involved their favorite deities and all that stuff. So they ended up kind of merging Indian migrant music with westernized elements. And the Indian, as well as the Chinese, but I'm specifically focusing on Indian here, communities became more connected to Jamaican society. And then in the last paragraph, it mentions that Indo-Caribbean celebrated Diwali while also, sorry, they celebrated Diwali and their interest in Hinduism was renewed by regular visits from Indian Swarmies. And I'm wondering if part of this had to do with the fact that travel to other Indo-Caribbean areas, as well as India just in general, is more prominent. And then at this point, people of mixed Indian descent and Indian descent were welcome, and they are staples in Jamaican culture, which definitely makes sense. Alrighty, and that concludes my video and my journey on Ancestry DNA when it comes to my older results and my newer results, seeing my ancestry journey, seeing how the communities or the admixtures remain the same and how some of their groupings change with some of the percentages, and the addition of ethnic groups, which I found to be very interesting and very helpful, where I'm definitely going to be delving into some of those communities or those tribes in the future and seeing how they ended up in Jamaica and the relation between them, and seeing if some of their cultural traditions went into Jamaica and other parts of the Caribbean. I'm definitely going to do a few more DNA tests, though it might not be for a while since I have to redo my 23andMe test because I had an older chip that just didn't update for like several years, so I deactivated it a few months ago. So I'm gonna have to order a new kit, and then I have to put one or both of the raw data in illustrative DNA to get those updated results and all that jazz. Anyways, thank you all for following this journey. I'll be back with something else. Take care.